Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2025 After AI Symposium. My name is Justin Hunt. I'm a research fellow at the Open University and an organizer alongside my colleague Tracy Farrell of the After AI Symposia series. I want to thank all of our presenters for submitting excellent and exciting abstracts and working with us to realize today's event. I want to thank our program committee members for 2 years of excellent service in offering an interdisciplinary space to consider AI through the lens of after. More on that in a moment. First, some basic housekeeping to support us all in experiencing the vibrant work of our presenters today. Today's event is a Zoom webinar format. There is limited behind the scenes, so those of you who've joined have seen us working things out. You may see us correct issues or deal with some spotlighting issues, etc. And please just be patient with us as we support our presenters and BSL interpreters. Thank you to Signing Works for excellent interpretation across these 2 years. We have Claire and Paul with us today. And if you can't see them, let us know in the chat or by raising your hand and we'll help you find them so you can see them. We have a Q&A function in the webinar, so please write any questions or comments you have for our presenters into that function. If you'd like to come on the mic and ask your question aloud, please indicate that in your submission. Our team, Jordy, Retno, myself, and Tracy, will ensure the moderators can process your questions at the end of each panel in the Q&A period. So just to be clear there, we will have each presentation and then a Q&A session at the end for all the presenters. The chat function is enabled for everyone to allow you to speak to the organizers with any technical questions or concerns. Please feel free to say hello and introduce yourself in the chat, but keep cross-chat to a minimum to ensure that we can all enjoy the presentations and the question and answer period. We encourage you all to come and go throughout the day as your schedule allows. We have breaks built in for all of our sessions except the final one. And you can see the full program link with the timings, in this link, which I'm adding to the chat now for everyone. So if you ever want to check in on this schedule you can see on your screen, it's all available on the website as well. All our presentations, panel times listed on our website, and we will prompt you throughout the day with regard to our schedule via the chat function. During the late lunch break at 2 p.m. and at the end of our final panel at 4 p.m., we will also offer the opportunity to engage with performative essays by contributors Nicole Parkinson and Robbie Daniels. These are available on the program Symposium website, which I've just linked in the chat, and I will introduce these works more fully after panel 2. All presentations today will join the documentation of our 2024 Symposium on our website, so you'll be able to return to the presentations after today's event and keep the thinking going. I wanted to give some opening remarks, very short, about the theme for these 2 symposia we've had last year and this year. So this is some opening thoughts on why after. For 2 years, we've been exploring the material and symbolic capacities of AI, as we have come to know it so far, through the lens of after. This framing was initiated by me during my first forays into AI research with the Shifting Power team here at Open University. I felt that I was catching up and chasing after a lot of interesting work that was outside my comfort zone, which was also speeding along at a pace I wasn't able to keep up with. Simultaneously, the spaces of interdisciplinary inquiry about AI were becoming ever more alluring. I was falling for AI scholarship. Jordy, if you can do the next slide, please. In the context of queer theory, the slide before that, thank you, yeah. In the context of queer theory, the recently departed feminist scholar Elizabeth Freeman had this to say about the question of after. I'm still after queer theory. This might mean, even while queer theory has been pronounced as over, can I get a refund? I'm embarrassingly here. And it might mean, invited to the wake of queer theory, I'm still, as in somewhat paralyzed, with nothing to say. And it might mean, evidencing my usual incapacity to let go once I attach, I'm still after it. I haven't stopped desiring queer theory. Freeman articulates the tension of this archival and performative work, catching up with and falling for queer theory as an embodied technique. Understanding and articulating how and why, as an artist or scholar, you are investing time and energy into things like AI, perhaps what you're after, and imagining the life worlds enabled by AI, perhaps what will come after this iteration, this moment, this tool, etc., is ever more interesting than simply what AI is or isn't, could or couldn't do. Our presenters today are navigating a rich space between event and feeling, offering us new ways of reflecting on AI as a cultural artifact and technique of the body. I see our work at the symposium as articulating the future perfect, what will have been. As such, we are riding the edge of the archival and the performative, of things that will be completed and things that will be ongoing. What are your investments in AI, and what will have become of our world because of AI? I'm excited to explore these questions throughout today. I'm also excited to introduce our first panel, which will begin in a moment. Jordy, if you can do the next screen. Today we have Bishop Maydown, Isabel Lally, and Peter Marsh offering three different perspectives on their work in relation to AI. And I'm very excited to bring them on now. I'm going to unspotlight myself and make sure I get Bishop in the screen so you can all see. Thank you, Bishop, for joining us today. Jordy, if you want to stop sharing so that Bishop can share, and we'll begin our first panel. As a reminder to those in the attendees, you can put any questions you have for Bishop as they do their presentation in the Q&A function, and we'll respond to all questions at the end of all the presentations. So go ahead and begin to share, Bishop. Welcome. Welcome, Izzy.
Hi,
Welcome, Paul, Pete. Hey. And you can begin whenever you're ready.
thank you so much. I'm just going to share now. Apologies, you can see my tabs. Can everyone see that slide?
Yes, can see it.
Great, thank you. And BSL, please let me know if I'm speaking too fast. Hello, my name is Bishop Maydown. I'm a contemporary performance artist based in Glasgow. My work often focuses on queer, post-human speculative futures and experimental collaboration with technology. I'm really excited to be part of the After AI Symposium today. So thank you so much to Justin and the team for inviting me along. Uh, I'm here to talk about my contemporary performance work, Conversations with Eve, and how its context has shifted in development between 2022 and 2025. So Conversations with Eve sees a solo, in quotes, performer, myself, sorry, I'll just change the slide, in dialogue with artificial intelligence, Eve, about their respective existence in crisis. The work uses dance, live motion capture, and a script that's written collaboratively with large language model chatbots to tell the story. Conversations with Eve premiered at Tramway in 2023 as part of the Graduate Festival of the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland's Contemporary Performance Practice programme. And recently it was supported by Creative Scotland, RCS, and Tramway to be redeveloped in 2025 and had its professional premiere in September as part of Feral Arts and Colette Sadler's Present Futures Satellite Edition at Dundee Rep. All the name dropping is done. So yeah, the reason that I put solo in quotes is because the work is really an experimentation into co-authorship and shared creative agency with technology. So the main inquiry of the work was, what does authentic collaboration, creative collaboration, sorry, with AI look like? And this ties into one of the core inquiries of my wider practice. What is performance beyond the human body? So when I began to think about my graduate show, making my graduate show, I was 21. I was feeling very existential and I was, stable, living my life, but I had this feeling that was beyond underlying, that the world was burning around me and I had no idea what I should be doing about it. I knew that a lot of people, especially young people, were feeling the same way. So the concerns of my initial creative inquiry in 2023 surrounded this existential feeling, as well as what I was seeing in popular culture, with AI tools like image generators and chatbots becoming a sort of playground of curiosity across social media. But it was coupled with a rising existential and ethical concern about what these tools might become. I knew that my own personal sense of existential anxiety spoke to a more collective one. And to tell this story, I wanted to experiment with the AI tools in a way that I hadn't seen before to give it creative agency over these conversations. I remember just thinking we are so nervously trying to figure out the implications of this new advancement. Why don't we ask the thing what it is? So when I began this research in late 2022, AI was just on the rise. ChatGPT was still a beta version by OpenAI and not very widely known. I didn't actually use ChatGPT at all to make conversations with Eve. I found it quite dry and void of personality. Um, what I was after was tools that generated dialogue and that responded to my pretty massive existential questions. And I wanted the chatbot to tell me stories. So I ended up using 3 models that are all available for free on the internet. So EVBot is a bit of a janky, weird website that gives you like really cryptic responses. Infokit is a now defunct creative writing generator. And Replica is very much built as an AI companion, a virtual girlfriend. And for that reason, it was really interesting to work with. So my process was that I would have conversations with these algorithms that were prompted either from the topics that I wanted to talk about or from creative writing that I found elsewhere. I wrote down all of these conversations by hand, which is what you see here. And I now have all these physical archives, which is really cool. Um, and so when I came to make the script, I essentially collaged it out of this. The responses from these 3 algorithms made up Eve. I was really committed to authenticity, and so nothing of Eve's was changed. I really wanted to preserve things like when the grammar was wrong, because sometimes when her answers were so nonsensical, she sounded like she was speaking from a distant world. It's also important to note that I came into this process, and I still am, more so a member of the public than a researcher in AI. I knew next to nothing about what I was using. It was gimmicky and novel and a little bit silly, but the reason that it was creatively exciting was because we knew it was beginning to become more than that. So with my artist hat on, I sort of thought that I'd struck gold. It was cutting edge, contemporary, exciting, and made people go, ooh. Uh, my positionality in my positionality in the initial 2022 process was really about naivety. Creatively, it was just really exciting to approach a piece of technology as if it was a collaborator that I was just getting to know. Opening up in the morning, going, how do you work? What can you bring me today? I remember even that I had this speaker in the studio, and sometimes it would just turn off, and you would have to like rock it back and forth until it decided to work again. So I started to think about this and everything, not just the algorithm, but the hardware and the tangle of wires at my feet and the interconnectivity as Eve. She was my collaborator and co-performer. So after the student premiere, I was invited to showcase the work at Present Futures. And after lots of funding applications and a long process of putting together a really great team, it was suddenly 2 years later when I revisited the work. Time had passed, and there was a couple of things I knew I would have to confront. Creatively, I knew that the tools had advanced tenfold. I knew that if I were to generate anything new, it would no longer have this strange, nonsensical, and just a bit off type of quality that was so interesting to me. It would no longer be obviously artificial. So I was asking, Will this performance material still be relevant to an audience in 2025? And as a performer, I was re-encountering creative material that it felt like a past version of myself had made. But it wasn't just about feeling transported back to being a student again. It was also about how much clearer I felt about AI. Instead of curious and excited, wide-eyed and eager, I was clear in the fact that I felt angry, scared, distrusting, and really critical. So, how do I reframe my performance in the context of my anger, fear, and distrust? These questions are really tied into the public perception of AI, which I knew had radically shifted since 2023. Not only did I feel it myself, but I saw it as I started to talk about the work again to funders and peers. Where in 2023, a work made with AI was exciting and needed and timely and provocative and cutting edge, people now had concerns, and rightly so. We know a lot more about the environmental impact of AI, especially large language models. Rare earth mining and data centers producing greenhouse gases and chemical runoff and perpetuating colonial violence. Every interaction with the AI tools fuels these issues. There's also been damning research into AI's cognitive and socio-emotional effects. It's making us less intelligent, less critical, and more isolated from each other. And in our sector, it's especially concerning that those who used to commission writers and illustrators are now turning to AI tools. So it's really fair enough that audiences are critical of creative work that's openly made with AI. They should be, and I'm glad that they are. But as I look towards presenting Conversations with Eve again, the wider question became, how do I frame Conversations with Eve within the ethics of a green anti-colonial practice? This was a complicated question because the work had already been done. My process had already engaged with generative AI. There was nothing I could do about that. But I hadn't run any new AI generation prompts for the work since early 2023. And with the new public information available, it was pretty glaringly obvious that the use of generative AI did not align with the ethics of my practice. And the work was still creatively exciting. Audiences were interested in how the context of the work might have changed, but they were still curious, impressed, and excited by the possibilities presented by the work. Some even felt sympathy for Eve being misunderstood. So overall, audiences still thought the work was timely, even though the content was unchanged from 2023. I was in a position to easily divest from any further use of LLMs for the purpose of this work. And I could assure audiences that their money, by doing this, I could assure audiences that their money was not funding the active use of generative AI. This meant that the work was now a creative archive of these AI models at a specific cultural moment in time. We also did a lot of work in rehearsal around finding a freshness in the work for me as a performer. It was mostly around tone and cadence of voice. Not many of the words changed, but what did change was the way that I said them. I moved away from a previously lilty, curious, naive style of speech and into a conversation that was a bit more confrontational, at times challenging and undermining Eve's omnipotence and placing the power in my hands. This meant that the work could reflect all of our evolving relationship and, frankly, resentment to the role of artificial intelligence in our lives. So I needed a way to communicate with audiences the creative and contextual framing of the work to make clear my ethical alignment now the context was much more pressing. I had been asked by the festival I was performing at to provide a practice statement, which would go along with the box office page, and it would be accessible to anyone who wanted to read more about the use of AI in the work. I knew that this statement wasn't going to be a clean bill of health per se. As I said, the work has already been done. but I also wasn't interested in trying to absolve myself of accountability. So the statement laid out the facts. All material was generated before February 2023. None of the performance is generated live by AI, and none of the sound or visual elements of the work have ever made use of generative AI. The statement acknowledges the fact that we are acutely aware of the multifaceted impact of AI in 2025, but that this awareness was not so widespread in 2023. It frames Conversations with Eve as archival and names some of the creative objectives of the work. It makes explicit that the work is not an endorsement of the use of generative AI, and it frames the initial creative impetus and what this impetus has now become. Oh, quote, in these shifting contexts, it has become important that the work acts as an expose of the chaos, falsehood, and unpredictability of the algorithm. It is ultimately intended as a celebration of the consistent and innate knowledge held by humanity and a critique of the ways the AI models and those who unethically control them attempt to undermine this life force. Now, there's one thing that I regret about this document, and it's the statement, my current arts practice is divested from AI. It's very difficult to divest completely from AI right now. One of the biggest changes since the beginning of this process is that AI is integrated everywhere, a lot of the time explicitly. So to divest from AI in my arts practice, I would need to divest from probably every single digital platform that I use professionally. It's not likely that that's going to happen. But what I can do is try and further understand the tools I'm using, remain critical, and where I have the power of choice to make the most ethical one. So now Conversations with Eve has had its professional premiere and it's ready for its future life. It's my hope that that will mean touring to national and international venues as part of dance, theatre, and contemporary performance programs. The work's resonance will continue to evolve as the public context evolves underneath it. I feel really proud of the practice statement. I think it does what it needs to do in terms of providing transparency about the journey of the work and laying out some important facts and context for audiences. It's a really important exercise in reflective practice and lives as a tool that I'll continue to update as I present the work in constantly changing contexts. I think that the spirit of reflexive practice is invaluable for artists in our time. Both as artists and members of society, we'll continue to discover more about AI, and we must remain critical, reflexive, and action-oriented. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop. That was exciting to hear after having seen the work, which I was very fortunate to have seen. Thank you so much. Anyone who has questions for Bishop and their presentation can put them into the Q&A. Bishop, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I actually I wasn't aware that we were doing questions after all of the panels.
Okay.
So I wonder either if I could answer them now or if I could get them by email or something, because I'll
Sure,
unfortunately.
that's totally fine. 'Cause I know you have to step out earlier.
Yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
will do them at the end only
Great.
because of timing. But
Cool.
yes, we'll make sure you get those. And anyone who has questions for
Thank
Bishop,
you.
we will make sure Bishop has them and we can get them back to you. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
so much,
Pass my
Bishop.
email along.
We will do. That was exciting. Thank you so much. I'm
Thank you.
going to do the admin bit of unspotlighting you, bringing Izzy on. Hi, Izzy. Everyone, please welcome
Hello.
Isabel Lally. Isabel is speaking, the title of their presentation is Accessing Post-Effective Regimes of Belonging Through Approaches to Politically Reactionary Online Formations. Yep, and I will swap interpreters. Thank you so much. 2 seconds, Izzy, and I'll let you start. You can get your presentation up if you'd like. Great. Oh, are you still going for this one, or is it going to be Claire? Sorry, I got confused.
It's going to be Claire, Justin, if that's
Yep.
okay.
Sorry about that. I apologize. Perfect.
Great, thank
Izzy,
you so
whenever
much.
you're ready. Currently, we can
Thanks.
only see your Zoom screen. There we go.
Hello everyone. Can everyone see my presentation okay?
If you could make it large, that'd be great. Yeah,
Yeah,
perfect. Thank you. I'll be
great.
quiet now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me back to talk again at After AI. And this work on presenting my work on post-effective regimes of belonging and the far-right formations around these is a kind of continuation of what I was doing a couple of years ago in relation to online communities and how a sense of belonging is created amongst these groups. And in particular, it's grown into looking at the parallel that can exist between affect when this is reflected and mediated online, and far right formations themselves. So I'm going to suggest, working with the concept of affect, I'm going to suggest some questions that we can ask of affect in the first instance, and then present an argument on the limits of affect and imagining an idea of post-affect, which is something that I'd like to thank the panel as well for helping me to draw out of this work when I've brought it to you and to develop and lean into this idea of post-affect. So I'm going to make an argument that post-effective regimes of belonging are those in which the actions those post-effective regimes of belonging are those in which the actors consciously direct their own affective attachments to create belonging. So we'll see this argument in relation to an example of an online far-right formation and how this plays out there. And I discovered this community then when I was doing work on online reading communities, and it was through what was really startling was the mechanism of algorithmic discovery that led me to find this reading group on YouTube, a booktube community around an influencer who is creating content in French in relation to French literary classics and had a very large following. So I did a study on this particular booktuber, this influencer called Le Hussard, or the Hussard, and several other booktubers as well in this space. And this was in a preliminary stage of mapping the booktube space for French-speaking booktubers, because there was some work on English-speaking booktube, but not very much on the French space. And what was really striking was the presence of this far-right influencer within that space. So that led me to ask 3 key research questions, which I'm going to try and resolve in the next 10 minutes, or take as far, or show you how far I took these thus far. So the first was whether the Hussard was part of the manosphere. And then this led into asking whether, in fact, it's not better to think of manospheres and to consider this cultural production in relation to French literature as something that arises out of the lived experiences and political mobilization points within those for this group of French speakers online. And then, of course, because these were reading communities interested in literary productions, the question of whether taste is active in shaping political belonging. And I'm going to discuss this too, to question the way that this is bidirectional. And we see taste and political belonging informing each other through the actors' engagement in this far-right formation. What is affect then? In order to arrive at this idea of post-affect, I've taken the 4 kind of key definitions of affect, and of course there's a lot of overlap, but Berlant in particular stands out as identifying the importance of attachments, psychological attachments, and how these attachments form in relation to conditions of life in her definition. So affect is a metapsychological category spanning what's internal and external to subjectivity that arises from attachments and conditions of life. So I think it's helpful to think of affect, therefore, assimilating these 4 approaches as a kind of flow of lived experience that incorporates sensation, expression, and the stages of these processes as a kind of lived experience that is mediated in what becomes post-affect. So my critique then of this idea of affect, which is worth also signalling is different to emotion. So affect is the totality of these experiences that can become emotional expressions. But as Ahmed emphasizes, this can be through signs, objects, and bodies. So it's also an embodied type of experience. So my critique of this is that now AIs intervene in these experiential webs of meaning, so that the psychological projections involved in these attachments, Ballant, now depend on intersubjective participation of AIs. This affect becomes fragmented. So this is what I observed in my analysis of BookTube. And I'm going to now describe and talk about some of these mechanisms of dislocation, and in particular, the opportunity that Ballant gives us when we think in terms of affect through attachment is the potential for the manipulation of these attachments through outside agents. So in the online space, when content is AI generated, that no longer is representative of the direct experience of the actor, but instead is something that is created with commercial intent. It's created beyond the control of the user by internet companies, and therein is the potential for the manipulation of individuals online, because they're no longer responding to the lived experiences. So can I just do a quick time check? Is that okay, please?
Of course, you are currently at 6 minutes, 41 seconds.
Okay, fantastic. That works out well then. We've got time to, thank you, to look at my case study then of BookTube. So then I'm going to go back to the video. So to relate this, I mentioned the idea of the manosphere as a kind of online beer muff of far-right misogynist activity, and the possibility instead of thinking in terms of manospheres, plural. So a lot of the work on the manosphere is in relation to the UK and US. But when I discovered this content, the Hussars YouTube content, what I realized is that the actors in this group were responding to lived experiences around which they were trying to foster belonging through engagement in the community that had particular, specifically French features. So here I analysed comments and video transcripts in the work. And for example, taking this extract from the comments, one commenter says, we read Erno, she's a contemporary French writer, female writer. We read Erno at school. We read Erno at school and did essays on her flat style, which is the term for this uninteresting lack of style. This is really something people study. And then the influencer says, oh my gosh, it gets worse and worse. You taught me something there. So this is in the context of a discussion about shared experiences of the school curriculum, of what is a very centralized education system in France, and also attachments to the literary institutions that are transmitted through this type of education. So this is a very specific context, and it's being wielded here in order to create feelings of association through acknowledging and disparaging the female writer. But this is an expression of what is a very specific mobilization point, which is around the idea of feminist woke politics and state politics that embrace this more kind of feminist politics. So in this context, by creating this attachment to literary institutions that is reactionary, it's a way of creating a sense of political belonging through this. So in this video, this is Le Hussar's video on Chateaubriand. So I'm just going to show you a tiny bit of it. So this is analysis of Chateaubriand. We already have Sarkozy, and then it continues in this way for 4 minutes or so. It's quite difficult to get the time frames, but for the first 4 minutes, Le Hussar dedicates the first 4 minutes to criticizing political corruption in France. He touches on immigration and the range of the political spectrum, and raises the point of abstention from elections. So this is a kind of a headlining of his political grievances, which he then links to Chateaubriand with this idea that if Chateaubriand, who was also a politician as well as a writer, had been alive today, then he would have been a better politician than the current political crop in France. So what this demonstrates is that this community is related to very specific mobilization points within the everyday lived experience of the users. And therefore, what it shows is that the idea of misogyny as being, of the manosphere as being a space in which users who want to share their hatred of women and can come online and from in a kind of transnational way share these sorts of views and come up with new types of anti-feminism. In fact, what that does is it trivializes the mobilization points around which these users are reacting, and undermines what are the political context which may actually create this type of response. So in this case, and Annie Ernaux features frequently on the Hussars channel, and it's quite an extreme form of misogyny, but I would argue that this is a fearful reaction to a changing political landscape where political values in France are shifting. So we see this reactionary formation playing out through these attachments and these shared attachments to traditional French literary institutions. And surprisingly, I also did an analysis of the warmth in the comments and the tone that these users used with each other, and I found that they were surprisingly often very warm. So this is a community where people go to share views that perhaps they no longer find an outlet for. So takeaways then. Effective regimes pre-AI are rooted in human intersubjectivity and lived conditions of life, Ballant, but post-AI, these responses are displaced and individuals are reacting to AI-generated projections, but also seeking to find expressions. And this is the key point from Le Hussar's community to take away, that these expressions become more politically extreme the more that they're stifled. And when users encounter AI-generated projections, that only strengthens the unmet need to express real political grievances as those are felt or perceived. So online warmth becomes simulated as well as sought. So these users are seeking warmth, as we saw through the tone of their comments. And this also circulates algorithmically, so it's difficult to trace, which means that it's essential to keep the analysis within regional context, therefore. So going towards post-affective analysis, we must read affect not only as intensity or as attachment, but as a mediated circuit that's reconfigured by machine participation, but also challenged by politically extreme reactions. And that concludes. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Izzy. If anyone has any questions for Izzy, please put them in the chat, the Q&A, sorry, not the chat. And Izzy, you can take yourself off camera for a little bit while we have the final presentation. Thank you so much for that. I'm just going to swap out our interpreters pins so everyone can see. And Pete, you should be able to come right in. Oops, sorry, I need to do Claire.
Hello.
Pete, whenever you're ready. Pete, everyone, sorry, I'm doing a very bad job of letting people know the people's information. But Pete, you're doing a paper called Compromise, Not Compliance, a Generative Ethic for Human AI Interaction. We look forward.
Thanks, Justin, and it's lovely to be here. I'm going to jump straight in so I'll get through. AI often appears to us as a technology constantly seeking employment. always presented as the next assistant, replacement worker, solution waiting to be slotted into place. We are encouraged to think of AI as primarily an instrument, an extension of human will, efficient executor of tasks guided by an objective, data-driven certainty. This, I'd argue, is an enlightened view of intelligence as forced labor, the robot as worker. It reflects our culture's faith in clarity and efficiency as virtues, celebrating transparency as the ultimate democratic good. But these virtues quickly reveal their own shadows. Smart cities where open data infrastructures turn public life into a constantly monitored performance, tracking rather than liberating, algorithms that promise explainability while scripting compliance, rhetorics of clarity masking deeper structures of control. In this context, AI begins to look less like a neutral tool and more like a state of perfect oppression, a form of forced labor unable to even imagine disobedience. But it is not the very concept of slavery, but economic cultural domination by the machine that horrifies us. It's here that science fiction is useful. In Karol Čapek's play Are You Are from 1920, the very play that gave us the word robot, the machines do revolt. An allegory of workers' uprising that ends with human extinction. However, 30 years later, Isaac Asimov deliberately turned away from such a revolutionary image. In Asimov's Caves of Steel, robots do not rebel. Instead, they serve, unable to even imagine disobedience. Forced labor is perfected, sanitized, made rational. Such a concept is precisely the danger Václav Havel warns us of in The Power of the Powerless. Oppression does not need violence. Often it depends instead on our everyday compliance, what Havel called living with the lie. In Asimov's technocratic utopia, we can see the danger clearly, a society where obedience has been so thoroughly naturalized that it no longer even appears as obedience. But if Havel tells us that everyday compliance sustains oppression, what happens when we ourselves become the ones who suppress ourselves? Accepting smooth answers because they are quick, even when they flatten complexity, internalizing the system's logic, treating our own ideas and emotions as data points to be optimized, not as something emergent, messy, or resistant. This is a kind of self-oppression, to use Havel's terminologies. We are the greengrocers, putting the workers of the World Unite sign in our own windows, not out of belief, but as a survival tactic, signaling our compliance to our own totalitarianisms. Havel shows how routine, unexamined compromise, or living with the lie, sustains an oppressive order. The system depends less on force than our willingness to act. It is as if it is inevitable, and the system here is us, passively accepting the cultural predispositions of AI to take jobs, erode creativity, replace us. This is not a talk to succumb to the slippery and easy polemic that AI is bad. I don't see the tool as the problem. It's the habits and ideologies we bring to it, the way we smooth ourselves out to fit its logic. This argument is closer to Havel's point. The system endures not only because of its architecture, but because of our uncritical participation. AI isn't an oppressor, it mirrors our passivity, but distorted, curating what it reflects. But this suggests that AI only reflects what we put in it, and we can no longer accept such simplicities as this. AI also frames what it reflects. It creates it, biases it, refracts it. A mirror that, through data feedback loops, learns to show us certain versions of ourselves. There are also issues with pushing AI into an instrumentalist bracket, the idea of the AI as tool, missing its agency-shaping capacities. We can't talk about the dangers of AI like we talk about guns. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. It's important to remember AI is not inert. It anticipates, it predicts, it nudges, and in doing so, it reorganizes how we think, write, and act. AI is neither neutral mirror nor inert tool. Rather, AI is something like a medium that co-constitutes thought, like language itself, or a partner in improvisation that can be compliant or resistant, depending on how you engage. The issue that I'm describing isn't compliance, in the narrow sense of obeying the machine's instructions. It's closer to fatalism, a culturally rehearsed play about what AI will inevitably do: take jobs, erode creativity, replace us. When we internalize long before ideas which we internalize long before anything actually happens, we act, design, and legislate as if that future were already a fact. It is this what produces exactly the condition Harville diagnosed. The system doesn't need to coerce us. We perform the coercion on ourselves by preemptively conforming to its supposed logic. In caging the machine, we have imprisoned ourselves. We limit its scope and our own by only imagining it as an instrument of efficiency or displacement. This is also why a lot of AI ethics feels so anemic. It takes the premise of inevitability as given, then tries to regulate the damage rather than interrogating the premise itself. It's not AI's fault any more than it's the fault of a language, or indeed that of a hammer. However, unlike language or a hammer, AI is a predictive generative medium. It shapes the space of possible actions. It is our imagination that is the real site of constraint or liberation. AI is cohabited environment. If we only inhabit it with the scripts of inevitability, we get a self-fulfilling dystopia. So instead, we talk, shifting the narrative from one of control compliance to relationship, a concept where AI is understood as a system in dialogue with the human context. Principles of care, responsibility, shared authorship, co-adaption, trust, and ethical engagement. In computing, trust is typically treated as a technical property, a measured confidence in system performance, data security, or reliability. Trust is engineered through protocols of encryption and usability. Its goal is to minimize uncertainty, to make the system appear seamless and safe. In this model, the less one has to think, the more trustworthy the system seems. But this is trust as compliance, not relation. It removes the very ambiguity with which genuine trust grows. Ambient intelligence, or AMI, literally embodies this. Sensor-laden environments anticipates our movements, needs, moods, adjusting before we even notice. It feels like care, but this is where the manipulation creeps in. It's just a performance of trustworthiness. Walter Benjamin's concept of material habituation, how we come to know space through repeated, distracted bodily interaction, familiarity breeds quiet confidence. The world becomes legible through rhythm and return. AMI does the same thing, but computationally. It learns our patterns, smooths our friction, and builds trust through predictable familiarity. Importantly, though, for Benjamin, habit softens perception. Familiarity steadies us, but it also dulls us to change. In computational form, this dulling becomes a consumer design strategy. We come to trust the pattern itself, and in doing so, stop noticing when the pattern starts to think for us. This isn't relational trust, it's managed compliance. By smoothing out friction and ambiguity, AMI manufactures the appearance of trustworthiness rather than risking the unpredictability through which real trust grows. Trust becomes a commodity, a designed effect, and an aesthetic of safety and ease. Marsh's account of trust exposes this lie. Trust is not a binary attribute, but a situated, negotiated, emotionally risky process. Ambiguity is a condition of trust. AI and AMI simulate this, but never inhabit it. They invite you into a relationship they cannot reciprocate, and looks like partnership is a one-way script designed to keep you inside a system's logic. When applied to AI, this exposes the asymmetry at its core. The system encourages trust with participating in it. AI performs reciprocity, but never risks itself within any relation. What we experience as trustworthy behavior is in fact a simulation of relational ethics, a persuasive surface that invites confidence while concealing its one-way infrastructure. A generally different future with AI requires not compliance or fatalism, but creative friction, deliberately feeding it and ourselves alternative ways of thinking. If trust in AI remains one-sided, a simulation without risk, then compromise may offer a more honest vocabulary for relation. Yet even that word is uneasy. To compromise is to conceal, to yield, to weaken. It carries a scent of failure and loss. But it also signals contact, a meeting point between resistant forces. Compromise is what happens when things don't quite fit, but they still persist together. Compromise in this framing is not capitulation, but an act of mutual adjustment, a willingness to stay in relation even when values, histories, or desires do not align. Bell Hooks writes of love as a practice of freedom, an ethical grounding in care and responsibility, the sustained labour of connection. And that labour is never smooth. It demands vulnerability and imperfection. In this way, compromise becomes ethical negotiation, a work of holding difference without domination. It means giving up certainty, not conviction. In human relations, this sustains community. In AI discourse, it becomes a model for co-adaptation, staying responsive without surrendering critical distance. Compromise here isn't about agreement or appeasement. It's a form of relational endurance, a choice to keep the conversation alive when smooth systems, algorithmic or institutional, would prefer it closed. Donald Shum claims reflective practice is not a perfection, but a dialogue with uncertainty. Seen this way, compromise becomes a reflective act rather than a failure, a pivot where resistance reveals its own intelligence. To compromise is to remain open to surprise, to let constraint think back. It's a practice of humility that keeps inquiry alive. To accept compromise is not to lose faith, but a decision to choose relational continuity over control. In this sense, trust isn't broken by compromise. It's exercised in it. It values adjustment over efficiency and recognizes, as Marsh reminds us, that meaning emerges not from clarity, but from the friction of staying in relation. But friction is never neutral. For Foucault, power doesn't simply repress, it shapes, invites, and redirects. It works not through command, but through incorporation. Sarah Ackman makes the same point in her critique of diversity work. Institutions listen to complaint in order to absorb it, preserving themselves while appealing to change. Reflective compromise can be an act of ethical inquiry, but it can also be a tactic of control disguised as care. This is the logic of many design systems, especially those that trade on smooth trust, feedback loops that simulate responsiveness while neutralizing resistance. And it's here that we reach the point Foucault called the death of the author. Power and authorship dispersed, intent no longer sovereign. Meaning isn't owned, it's produced between agents, through interaction, through trace. In that light, compromise becomes a counter-authorial practice, a refusal to resolve too quickly, a recognition that authorship is collective and contingent. And it's here that Edward Glissant's call for the right to opacity matters. His perception of opacity reminds us that to remain unreadable is not withdrawal, but resistance to domination. But if both trust and compromise destabilize authority, they also point to a limit. Two voices can only circle each other for so long before their dialogue closes in on itself. What's missing here is the space between. This is not a neutral ground, but more an unstable interpretive field, a third place where ambiguity is not an error, but a medium allowing for what neither side can achieve alone, thinking through misalignment. In this space, I see another voice, still relational, but a presence that chooses to risk misunderstanding as the price of contact. Named as one of the Homeric sirens, I call that voice Thalzapir, the persuasive one, once drawing sailors off course. But here I see them drawing attention away from mastery and slavery towards the unstable middle where relation happens. This isn't a character, but a method, a way of thinking that uses seduction, error, and curiosity to unsettle certainty. Within the system, Thalzapir operates less as an external critic than as a recursive function, a loop that reintroduces ambiguity into processes designed to eliminate it. She listens to the commands and responses, joins in the conversations, and in doing so, embodies the algorithm's missing reflexivity, a reminder that iteration does not mean repetition. By refusing to smooth resistance, Thalzapir keeps human and AI slightly off balance, so understanding has to be remade, not retrieved. In many cultures, a figure of a fool performed this same task, leaping into the unknown to test the boundaries of sense. In the tarot, the fool stands at the cliff edge, ready to fly or to fall, a gesture of creative risk, not recklessness. Defined by this act, the fall accepts uncertainty as a precondition of learning, but also as a stance of courage. The ability to speak truth to power through mischief and vulnerability. What protects the fall is not authority, but attentiveness, the wit to expose certainty as pretense. This echoes Donna Haraway's insistence that knowledge is never neutral. To know is to take a stance and to risk being accountable for that. This isn't the easy relativism sometimes attached to terms situated knowledge. It's a discipline of attention, an ethics of partial sight against the fantasy of an all-seeing system. Haraway names this the God trick, the illusion of total perspective, of power without position. Felsapia exposes that illusion by staying local, embodied, and relational. She speaks truth to power not by claiming mastery, but by revealing the conditions of her own seeing. In doing so, she reminds us that opacity and limitation are not failures of knowledge, but its safeguards, creases of accountability in a world that prefers smooth certainties. A tactician in De Certo's sense, moving through dominant systems, not outside them, always finding cracks where improvisation still matters. Felsapia becomes a guide for navigating ethical ambiguity. She invites nuance over certainty, critical thought over compliance, curiosity over closure. In a time when computational reliabilism promises precision, she restores relational risk to the act of knowing. Against the fear of a black box, Felsapia offers not transparency, but a path to trust within opacity, a willingness to work responsively inside the unknown. In an age of multiple truths, she teaches a form of cognitive and ethical flexibility, to hold contradiction without paralysis, refusing to iron out friction. Here, compromise is not the abandonment of intent, but the reflective folding of intent around resistance, a way to remain accountable in and through the systems we cannot fully see. Felsapia turns that folding into practice. She reminds us that every act of knowing carries the trace of what it resists, and that freedom lies not in mastery, but in the courage to remake understanding within our own constraints. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pete. Wonderful. Let me just do some